Mixed martial arts have been connected since the first day a warrior had to physically demonstrate their right to lead. The expectancy and tradition that many prominent members of royal families should serve in the armed forces demonstrates such a connection. Every country has its histories of warrior monarchs, schooled in the arts of war both on and off the battlefield. In my own country, Henry V's successful propaganda machine, wielded in his lifetime and immortalised generations later by Shakespeare, ensured the iconic image of a crowned leader thrusting headlong into combat. Although Ian Mortimer has done an excellent job in debunking much of the hype surrounding this Lancastrian king, mainstream history maintains that Henry was a brave and skilled fighter on the battlefield. Losing his horse at the Battle of Agincourt, he was reported to have fought on foot as he defended his wounded brother Humphrey. Henry V channelled the image of his battling great-great-grandfather Edward I, an avid fighter in battles before and after his ascension to the throne. Edward had forcibly appropriated Wales's legendary King Arthur for England as his role model. Arthur, with his magic sword and brotherhood of knights, was very much the British martial arts archetype, romanticised in similar fashion to folkloric warrior nobles found in many other cultures. When Shakespeare first wrote his plays, Elizabeth I of England had evoked a Boudican image of an armed female monarch standing in front of her troops as they faced the possibility of a Spanish invasion. Her chosen martial art was archery. Meanwhile, one of Elizabeth's contemporaries in Spain, Donna Ana de Mendoza, the Princess of Eboli, was associated with fencing. The eye patch she wears in her famous portraits has been attributed to hiding an injury she suffered when she was 12 or 14 and cross rapiers with a page. With Donna Ana being cast as a royal rebel and accused of a murderous plot, the concept of the beautiful princess disfigured by a fencing accident adds to the mystery and intrigue that surrounds her reputation. However, with zero evidence of the accident ever occurring, it appears safer to conclude that the eye patch probably hid an atrophied eye caused by a medical condition that would have been deemed socially unacceptable to exhibit in public by a member of the Spanish aristocracy. Elizabeth I's infamous father, Henry VIII, is most credited for jousting, but it would appear, much like the two battles he actually participated in, a lot of exaggeration was built up around his achievements in this combat sport. Like his daughter, he was a skilled archer and also threw javelin and could wield a mean double axe. In his youth, he was a tall, strong and athletic man, but that didn't stop him from losing to King Francis I of France in their wrestling contest at the historic Field of the Cloth of Gold meeting in 1520. This was a jacketed wrestling contest, with Francis being trained in Garan or Breton wrestling and Henry in Wrestling or Cornish wrestling. Both styles are fought standing up, with the objective being to throw the other person to the ground. The main difference between the two sports comes down to the tightness of the jackets, an item of clothing that was derived from its shepherd culture roots. Bretons preferred tighter jackets to their Cornish counterparts. Henry suggested the bout after he had bested Francis in archery. Francis originally demurred, knowing Henry's egotistical to narcissistic reputation, but relented and won the bout with a Breton trip. Against form, Henry took the loss in good spirit. The two men parted as friends, and there was no wrestling rematch or a rubber contest in another martial art. With both men gaining a victory against one another at this ridiculously lavish and extravagant truce party, it was probably better that way. However, their political relationship would continue in the form of off-and-on wars. The ideal that we might be able to settle conflicts by having two leaders duke it out isn't just the stuff of stories. For example, only in December 2021, Brazil's Simão Peixoto, the mayor of Borba, and ex-councillor Erineu Alves da Silva apparently settled their differences in a 30-minute 3-round mixed martial arts contest. 39-year-old Peixoto apparently defeated his 45-year-old opponent, and the two embraced with smiles for the cameras. Make of that whatever you want. Politicians in the modern world have long been attracted to the martial arts, whereas some high-ranking politicians and world leaders have found it useful to leverage patriotic support by using their military background. Others are keen practitioners in various combative systems. Genki Sudo, for example, joins Japan's long list of practicing martial arts politicians. In addition to serving as a political independent in the House of Councillors, he is a mixed martial arts fighter and has competed as a professional kickboxer in K1. Meanwhile, in the UK, Rosie Sexton is a mathematician and musician who fought as a professional mixed martial artist before becoming a Green Party councillor and later challenged for a leadership position. Sexton's martial arts grade include black belts in Taekwondo, Jitsu Foundation's Jiu-Jitsu and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Canada's 15th President, Pierre Trudeau, earned a second-degree black belt in judo under Takahashi School of Martial Arts in Ottawa. There's no secret that Vladimir Putin, Russia's sometimes president, sometimes prime minister, has loved judo since his youth and earned his first dan when he was 18. He also extensively cross-trained in taekwondo. However, since Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, the International Judo Federation and European Judo Federation stripped Putin of his honorary president and ambassador roles. The World Taekwondo Federation followed suit, stripping Putin of his honorary 9th degree black belt status. One has only to read Alex Gillis's A Killing Art to see the strong political connections between Taekwondo's two largest associations and the governments of South and North Korea. Modern history's most reviled dictator, Adolf Hitler, promoted the virtues of boxing in his book Mein Kampf. Although he had served as a soldier and had been wounded in action, Hitler wasn't much of a martial artist, but was keen to toughen the German youth through sports like boxing. Uganda's brutal dictator Idi Amin learned how to box in the army and rose to become the Ugandan light heavyweight champion in 1951 until 1960. Drunk on power in 1974 as the country's ruler, and despite now being totally out of shape, Amin decided to open the 6th All-African Amateur Boxing Championship in Lugogo, Kampala, with a boxing match between him and the national boxing coach Peter Serewagi. This contest went back to a grudge Amin had harboured from 16 years previously. This was when Serewagi had floored Amin at the 1958 National Championship at the Nakawa Engineering School. To add insult to injury, the boxing coach was then a welterweight. This time the match was staged for Amin to win, and Serewagi had to take the beating and the fall. The USA has a fairly strong tradition of presidents who are keen martial artists, starting with their inaugural leader. George Washington became proficient in Irish collar and elbow wrestling when he had to deal with bullies at school. Abraham Lincoln, the 16th president, was also a noted collar and elbow wrestler, and one story goes that he once threw a man who was roughing up one of his supporters before returning to his speech. Another keen wrestler, 18th President Ulysses S. Grant, apparently apologised to Robert E. Lee for the disarray of his camp at the famous surrender of the Confederates at Appomattox, due to several of his troops joining him in some sparring the previous night. When I later researched the video version of this podcast, I discovered that this particular story is a myth. Never one to pass up the inclusion of some martial arts debunking, I consulted the research carried out by the Martial History Team website. The website puts it that none of the biographies the author has read on Grant mention his wrestling credentials at any level. It appears that the source for the myth originates at the end of Chapter 2 of Marcus Griffith's book Fall Guys, The Barnums of Bounce. An interesting and perhaps ironic further sidebar here is that this book might well be one of the first exposés of kayfabe in professional wrestling. 1937 would have been 12 years since the first established example of a worked World Championship match in the sport that had been catch-as-catch-can wrestling, and at this point might be regarded as the sports entertainment art form of pro wrestling, or wrestling if you must. The Martial History Team points out several flaws in the accounts given in the book. Firstly, the story is coloured with Grant given a voice and informally addressing Robert E. Lee as Bob, which seems highly unlikely. Secondly, it is a recorded fact that the future 18th President of the United States did not stay in a tent at Appomattox, where Lee was supposed to have met him to discuss the conditions of the Confederate surrender. In reality, Grant met Lee at Wilbur McLean's house to talk terms. The website article then cites what might be the real-life inspiration for the myth told by Griffiths. It comes from a book called Grant, which is a biography written by Ron Chernow. Chernow also quotes another book, this time written by a contemporary of Grant's, called Campaigning with Grant, written by his personal secretary, Lieutenant Colonel Horace Porter. I will quote the excerpt as it is presented on the website, including the edits of unnecessary material and insertions of contextual parentheses. Quote, "Without Staff Officer Rawlings, Grant desperately needed Julia and the children, who visited City Point in August 1864, staying for a day aboard a steamer. Horace Porter, Staff Officer, left a charming vignette of him roughhousing with his boys. Quote, The morning after their arrival, when I stepped into the General's tent, I found him in his shirt sleeves, engaged in a rough-and-tumble wrestling match with the two older boys. He had become red in the face and seemed near out of breath from the exertion. Grant was 42 at this point, his sons Frederick and Ulysses Jr. 14 and 12 respectively. The lads had just tripped him up, and he was on his knees on the floor grappling with the youngsters and joining in their merry laughter, as if he were a boy again himself." End quote. The takeaway here is that Grant was a family man who enjoyed roughhousing with his sons. Roughhousing, incidentally, is a great foundational gateway into developing grappling self-defense and sport wrestling for children. However, despite the lack of evidence supporting Grant's background in competitive wrestling, or even sparring other wrestlers of his age, the article goes on to say that Ulysses could certainly handle himself in a dangerous situation. It references Lloyd Lewis's biography Captain Sam Grant, which cites an 1885 article published in the New York Tribune that quotes an article written in Wisconsin's Janesville Gazette. The anecdote describes a 38-year-old Grant, whilst acting as a debt collector for his father's company in 1860, kicking in a door and disarming a shotgun-wielding fraudster. Lewis also describes Grant, once made colonel of the 21st Illinois Regiment, successfully staring down the soldiers at Camp Yates and whipping them all into order within minutes of arriving. This was after they had initially berated him and even knocked his hat off. The example is given as Grant's ability to fight without fighting, a mastery of soft skills, if you will. 44th President Barack Obama is perhaps one of David Posner's most famous Taekwondo students, and it was an interest shared with his fellow Democrat, the 42nd President, Bill Clinton. However, perhaps the USA's most dedicated martial artist was Theodore Teddy Roosevelt. Known for his highly adventurous and physical nature, Roosevelt had helmed his own Rough Riders, the first United States volunteer cavalry and the only regiment of its kind to see action in the Spanish-American War. When he was president, he regularly indulged in boxing and wrestling in the White House, frequently inviting guests to spar with him. When Kano's Judo, then generally going by its Jiu-Jitsu title, made its way to the Americas, Roosevelt was immediately interested. He switched from boxing to more grappling-based arts as he got older and achieved the rank of third-degree brown belt under the Kodokan representatives John O'Brien and Yoshiki Yamashita. As you can see, it's quite easy to ramble on about the way martial arts intersect with so much in life. My hope is that those listeners who feel I go down too many self-indulgent rabbit holes will have a better idea of the warren I inhabit, and maybe they'll stick around to explore these many different tunnels. I don't believe that martial arts are everything. There are so many things in my life that do not revolve around martial arts. My family and their interests are important to me. The places I wish to visit in the world do not stem from a direct interest in combative disciplines. As far as passions go, writing is probably my first love. The first book I wrote was not a martial arts book, and I don't intend for it to be my last non-martial arts, non-self-protection book. My martial arts book collection, although sizable and growing, does not have representation in my living room or bedroom bookcases. Similar comparisons might be made with my podcast and video playlists, where I mainly listen to history, literature, psychology and classic movie analysis. It might surprise those who enjoyed my Martial Movie Massacre regular features that I do not watch many martial arts movies these days, and I wouldn't count an overtly martial arts centred movie on my top 10 list of favourite films. My love for comic books might be what sent me on my own martial arts journey, but martial arts did not make me fall in love with comic books. Once I spoke to an old work colleague I had known for around 15 years at the time, and they did not believe I had an interest in martial arts. It was a total shock to them. Indeed, I don't do very well at martial arts conventions, or worst of all at meeting people whose introduction to me is that they do martial arts. Then there are people in my life, very close to me, who say that sooner or later I will bring up martial arts in conversations. Perhaps that goes back to the Warren of spin-off topics, perhaps a Warren of snares, if you will pardon forcing in an awkward and tasteless Watership Down reference. However, let's not think of them as distractions, but rather interconnecting ideas and useful passages to find a new angle. Martial arts might not be everything, but maybe everything is martial arts.